How you guys doing? I'm gonna ask that one more time. How are you guys doing? All right, so now you're with me. Excellent. Thank you guys for being here so much. We are all very excited to be on this panel with you. I've got three really smart people on this panel with me. They're all a lot smarter than I am, so I'm gonna do my best to stay out of the way and not break anything. The way this program is gonna go is I'm just gonna have them explain how they got into technology. They are all technologists at the software level and at the entrepreneurial level. And then I'm gonna ask them a few questions about their experience, what they've enjoyed, what they've found challenging, and then we'll open up the floor and you guys can give them hell, okay? So before we do get started, I'm just gonna quickly introduce myself. I'm a venture capitalist and I'm at a firm called Collaborative Fund. Collaborative Fund is an early stage firm that invests in companies that make the world a better place. So we believe that the companies that you guys are going to found and that you guys are going to choose to work for and that you guys are going to buy from even as consumers over the next 10, 20, even 50 years are going to be companies that stand for something, companies that have a really strong mission, that have a strong purpose, and that are making the world a more interesting place. Because you're so much smarter than our generation in that way. And so that's why we're investing that way. We've invested in a bunch of companies in New York, including Kickstarter and Codecademy, and companies in California like Lyft and Reddit, which you may have heard of. So it's fun. And without further ado, I'd like to ask each of you guys to maybe just do 5 or 6 minutes talking about your journey, how you got into tech, where you are now, and then we'll start the Q&A. So if we can start from the end with Chinedu, go ahead.
Okay. Hi guys, how are you? Excellent. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. So my name is Chinedu Echeruo. I am Nigerian by birth. I came here came to the United States when I was 16 years old. And my journey started off at Syracuse, majors in finance and accounting. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I ended up joining an investment bank, did that for a few years. I went to business school and I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I remember talking to my mother and saying, I want to be an entrepreneur, and like a typical African mother, she's like, what's that? Entrepreneurship isn't a job, you have to find a problem to solve. And that's when I went to business school. Then after business school, I was so sure I wanted to be an entrepreneur that I didn't interview for a job in school. And so I ended up starting my first company with a classmate and my brother that ended up wasn't successful. It was a very good experience. But so I came back to New York. I was dead broke. I needed to start, pay rent. So I joined. I went back into finance, worked for a type of firm called a hedge fund. And I remember they didn't have money to pay me, so I ended up telling them that I would work for free for 3 months so they could actually see my work, because I was so eager to get back into get an income. They liked me, then eventually they ended up hiring me, and I was there for another 3 years. Then at some point that entrepreneurial urge hit me again, and I decided to leave the hedge fund and start a company called Hopscotch. And what it does, gives you subway and bus directions in cities. The company got bought by Apple in 2013, so now I'm working on my second company, which is a company that plans to connect the world by letting you schedule meetings with people that could change your life, and then have some of the money you pay for that meeting go to the person's charity. So and it's called Geek and Meet.
Thank you. Go ahead, Simone.
Cool. So my name's Simone Hill. So I guess I'll start. I graduated from college in 2012. I majored in anthropology. Kind of chose it because I love the social sciences, not because I was like, oh, I know what career I'll make out of this, but I loved anthropology. And wrote my everyone at Princeton has to write a senior thesis. So I wrote mine on weddings and wedding traditions and kind of the intersection between like reality TV and wedding vlogs and wedding cultural traditions. So when I graduated from college and was unsure of what to do, it made the most sense to me to become a writer about weddings. So I actually joined the Knot.com in August after graduating from college and started as an editorial assistant, writing all day, every day about wedding trends, you know, cakes, flowers, you name it. I wrote about it and loved my job there and loved it because the Knot was had a very startup feel, and it was a media brand that had started online. They actually acquired magazines after, you know, starting as a website. So after 2.5 years there, I kind of realized what I really loved about the job was, you know, the technology part, the product, and I had all these exciting ideas, but I didn't have any skills to kind of like actually build them myself. So I kind of took a risk. So in January of 2015, I decided, you know, I don't know anything about programming, but I think it'd be really cool to be able to build things myself, and I love talking to our developers and like learning from them. So I submitted an application to the Flatiron School, which is a web development boot camp based in the financial district. It's not in actual Flatiron, it's in the financial district, and was accepted into their 3-month web development immersive program. So I started there the first week of April last year. Was terrified because I had actually zero experience. Like I'd written a little bit of HTML like in my job, just like seeing it in, you know, our little editor that the editors would use to write content, but really didn't know anything at all. And was terrified to go, you know, be in an environment where that's what I would be doing all day, and I didn't know if, you know, I would be good at it, if I, you know, would have to drop out after 2 weeks. Made it through the whole 3 months and graduated from Flatiron, and was actually, then Flatiron hired me on for the summer to teach with their pre-college program. So I was teaching high school students, went out to San Francisco, loved it, loved being in the developer community out there. There's hackathons and events all day, every day, like you name it, you could eat for free in San Francisco just going to tech events. Loved teaching students and just sharing what I had just learned. And then I started, so that was just for the summer, and I started a full-time job at Vogue.com, which is it's a brand of Condé Nast. So as you might know, Vogue, the magazine, so their website. So I work as a brand developer, doing mostly front-end development for them. Yeah, and it's been a little over 6 months there now, so I'm really loving it.
Hi, I'm Cole. I have never known what I wanted to do. When I was in high school, and trying to decide where to go to college, I didn't know where to go or what to do. I ended up applying to almost 20 schools, only knowing that I wanted to be somewhere warm at a big sports school doing something with math. And so that was how I ended up at NC State doing mechanical engineering. A year into that, I realized that I still didn't really understand what mechanical engineering was. I understand it a lot better now, but at that point I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't think this is what I should be doing. So I decided to follow my lifelong dream of being on TV. I transferred schools to go to the University of North Carolina, and I got into their journalism program. But by the time I graduated there, I realized that that wasn't what I wanted to do anymore. So I have my degree in journalism, but I have not really worked in journalism in my life. I worked in retail for a couple years before finding a job as an office manager here in New York. I was working in retail in Philadelphia. And then while I was working as an office manager, that was when I really started thinking, like, maybe I should learn to code, because this is something that I've been interested in for a long time, on and off, but I'd never really devoted any resources toward it, besides when I was younger, and I would have a Zanga page, which you've probably never heard of, but they came before MySpace, which you could edit using the HTML. And you could say, oh, I want to have, you know, a trail of stars following the cursor on the page. You could just throw something in the HTML and that would make it happen. And so I would do that. And then in 2010, I got a Tumblr, and I didn't like any of the themes really that were available to me, but I liked pieces. So I said, you know what, I'm going to look into the code and see if I can figure out how to take the bits and pieces that I want from this theme and add them to that theme. And so that was how I got introduced to CSS. And so then finally, years after that, I was just like, okay, well, I have a little bit of experience, and I've enjoyed the bit of coding that I've done previously. So now I'm going to actually, dedicate some time to learning about it. So in January of last year, at the same time as Simone, actually, I started teaching myself to code. Mostly through a lot of online tutorials, and I actually had the intention of also doing a coding boot camp. I didn't go down the same path as Simone because I actually ended up going to a programming retreat, which was different from a boot camp because there was no curriculum. It was incredibly stressful, but it was also amazing because it was stressful because I was a new programmer, only 3 months in, teaching myself, and then also having to set some goals for myself, saying, oh, these are things I want to build. There was no curriculum, there was no one to tell me what to do, and so I just kind of had to say, okay, what do I want to build? And I'm so thankful for having that experience because it's gotten me to the point and in this mindset where I say, oh, I can build that. I have no idea how, but I'll look it up, I'll figure it out, and it'll take some time, but it was a great experience for me because it showed me how to teach myself and how to have confidence that I can learn anything on my own. And there are so many tutorials around online for every bit and piece of something that you might want to build, and so I relied heavily on those, as well as the amazing community of programmers that I had around me. And so I did that program. I finished in the summer last year, and then I freelanced a little bit, building websites for people, because that was really cool. I could just do that very easily. Someone said I need a website, and I was like, all right, I can do that. I know how to do that. I know how to build what you want. And then just actually in the beginning of February, I started an internship at a startup in the Flatiron neighborhood called Venue Book. It's kind of like Airbnb or Open Table for event spaces. You can go online and say, oh, this is my budget, and these are how many people I'm going to have, and type in a few different criteria and see what event spaces are available. And I'm absolutely loving it. The internship is supposed to end at the end of this month, and they've already told me that they want to keep me on as a full employee, and I plan to stay because I'm very happy there. So even though I never really had a path, I've ended up in a great position, and I'm very happy doing something and learning a lot even every day.
Told you they were smart. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, good. You can keep the mic.
Okay.
One thing that I found really interesting about all of your stories is you didn't come out of first grade knowing you wanted to be a coder or knowing you wanted to be a tech CEO. And frankly, even it seems like for all of you, even in your 20s, you were still figuring that out. And so for folks who are a little bit younger, what do you wish you knew earlier that you now know that you can maybe talk about in terms of your experience?
Okay, I'll go. So one thing that I wish I'd known earlier, I was really afraid to take risks. Once you get a job out of college, you're especially at least in my generation that had just come from the recession, and everyone, the few classes before me there was this atmosphere and this feeling that none of us will ever get jobs. So that kind of lingered over, even though I graduated in 2012, kind of at the end. It was I have to hold on to this job for dear life and never ever let it go. And I think that mindset made me at first made me less willing to kind of explore what I really wanted and how I could learn from that job of what the next step is. I think thinking of your first job out of college as, this doesn't have to be your career. This is kind of the stepping stone to learn what your career will be. So you could, kind of take any kind of job that you learn and you're enjoying it, and it gives you skills that you can take with you, no matter where you go. But that first job, it's not the end all be all. You don't have to hold on tight and be worried that, that's all that there will be. So I guess, I wish I'd known that sooner.
So I think for me, what I should have, what I would have liked to know when I was in high school is you can actually do much, much, much more than you think you can do. Right? you can do much, much, much. So just think of 4 years from now, and just think of what your ideal life is after college, right? Just think of that. Then multiply it up by 10 times, right? You can do that as well, right? So that's the idea. And it's hard if you're in high school for you to really believe that. But the trick is, even if it's hard to believe it, just always try to remember that you can do much, 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 much more than you think you can do. And if you have that mentality and you go through college and you're setting you're free to imagine all the things you could do with your life and what you can accomplish, or in whatever way accomplishment is in your, like, you think of accomplishment, you can do 10 times that. So I think that's the biggest lesson, and it's hard to really understand that now, but just try to remember and dwell on that idea that you can do 10 times what you think your best life or your best accomplishment is.
Oh my goodness, I don't really know what I would say I wish I had known back then. Because I've always been the kind of person who doesn't really plan ahead. I don't have a 5-year plan, but I do like to be prepared. So that's my main thing, is like, I'm not gonna say, okay, I need to accomplish this, this, and that in the next 5 years, but I do say, I wanna learn this, this, and that. And then when it comes to the point where those things come into play, I have them on my tool belt. So part of the reason that I actually even got into coding was, I had been thinking about it for a while before I actually started dedicating myself to it full time. And I had actually let a friend talk me out of it because she said, it was just boring and I did the same thing over and over, which I understand can happen and does happen in unfortunate situations, but that's never the experience that I've had. But yeah, I guess I just would have, I don't know if there's anything, I'm sorry, I don't have a great answer to that one as far as what I would have liked to have known. Just the fact, it's just more of an attitude of, just having confidence in yourself that you can learn things that you never thought you would be able to, or you look at something and say, I don't know how to do that. How could I even attempt that? Like, just try to block those voices out and say, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna research. I'm gonna Google, and I'm gonna figure it out.
One thing about learning to become a software engineer is that it is super intimidating. And so I have 2 questions for you guys, Cole and Simone. The first one is, how do you get over that intimidation factor? And obviously just having confidence is part of it, but like, were there certain tactics that you guys specifically engaged in while you were learning how to become proficient? And then the second one is, what's the hardest thing? Like, what actually does suck when the push comes to shove? Because we're curious about that too.
So wait, the first question was...
How do you get over being intimidated?
How do I get over being intimidated? I mean, I don't know that you ever completely get over it.
Fake it
till you make it. There's the imposter syndrome. Like, I look up every day and I'm like, wait, I'm a software developer. And like, that's weird to me still to say that. That I'm a bona fide software developer. Like, honestly, that you are a software developer the second you put like code into an editor and like start writing. It's as simple as that. But I think the way that I get over it is to just, keep asking questions and, even just like Googling online, like you will see like the breadth of like how much knowledge that there is, and like that there are people that are, don't even know the simplest basics, what HTML is, what CSS is. And then of course there will always be the people that, wrote the language, they created the tools that we're working with, they've architected, complex apps and things like that. There will always be people on either side of you in the spectrum. And you just have to, I think, take the mentality that like, you're where you are on the spectrum and all you can do is like work to get better and improve yourself and not really compare yourself to other people. I think it's really easy to try and compare yourself to other people, but people learn different aspects of becoming a software engineer in different ways. Like some things will click for, one thing will click for Cole that won't click for me right away, but I'll have something else that's clicking. And so you just have to be kind of confident that like you're doing it your way. And then I think the other part that is still hard, I mean, just like keeping up with the learning curve. Like there's always new things to learn. I never sit at my desk at work. Like there's always a ton of work at work, but even when you first start a job, there's kind of this weird period where they like don't want to give you projects because there's like so much to catch you up on, but also like it's just like a weird waiting period. And like I use that time to learn, like looking at our code, looking at comments in our code, reading up on things that I didn't know about. Like I think the hardest part is all because technology is changing all the time, just keeping up and being at the forefront of that while also trying to like maintain your day-to-day of what there is to do. But there's a lot of resources out there to do that too.
I was not intimidated at first getting into this field. Something that I actually left out of my earlier recent history is that I was actually working at a job at a branding agency as a studio manager, and I'd been wanting to actually find a way to, increase my role there. And so that was when I really started seriously considering coding. Unfortunately, after about a year working there, I was drugged and assaulted, and I just was not a human being anymore. Like I had a really tough time just going to work and being a person, basically. I ended up losing my job, and I just kind of fell apart for a couple weeks. And then the only thing that I could think to do in a situation where I felt like I had lost all control was improve upon myself. So that was when I immediately made the decision. I said, okay, well now this is my time to go after this, to learn something new, invest in myself. I was going to the gym all the time because I was like, this is the only thing I can do. I only have control over myself. So I started teaching myself to code, and it was actually very therapeutic and cathartic for me because I knew that I was improving myself and I was learning, and it was exciting. And then eventually I went to this programming retreat, and when I got there was when the intimidation really started to set in. Because that was, as Simone mentioned, the imposter syndrome. I was like, what am I doing here? I've been programming for 3 months, and there was a whole range of experiences in the people that I was surrounded by. Some people had been programming for 15, 20 years, and I was still trying to figure out what to work on. And so I got there, and I was just incredibly intimidated, but the best thing that I could do in that situation, after a week or two almost of just kind of feeling like I was floundering, I said, let me get back to what I know. And I said, okay, what did I build? I built my first project from scratch, applying to get into that program. And so I went back to that project, and I said, okay, let me see if I look over this now, like what would I change? What have I learned since then? And I asked my peers, and I asked the people who had had more experience than me, because they were all so incredibly kind and willing to help, and that was what everybody was there for. So I was very lucky to be involved in that community, and it was a lot of support that I needed at that point. But it was incredibly intimidating, but the best thing that I learned from my experiences last year, which are issues that I'm still dealing with to this day, is just how important perseverance is, and just kind of pushing through and having the confidence in yourself that you know you'll get through something, even though it might feel incredibly difficult. I mean, if it's something you want, you just have to push for it.
Wow, thank you. Speaking of perseverance, Chinedu, as a founder, a lot of people think it's super glamorous and that you're playing ping pong all day and you're going to parties and millions of dollars are flowing. Can you talk a little bit about what it's actually like to be a founder, particularly as it relates to perseverance? Because I think there might be an interesting lesson there.
Sure. So when I left the company, the hedge fund I used to work for, so I had never really built a technology company, and I can't code. I couldn't code. I still can't code. So all I had was a spreadsheet, and because Excel, that's the only sort of tool I knew how to use then. So I had this vision for this idea, this this company, but how do I start, right? So you start, and as was mentioned, you just learn. There's so much information available, especially now, right? So like whatever topic you're interested in, you don't even need to go to like conferences. Like, there's so much information available online on YouTube, etc. But then it was much worse. So I ended up finding this website that just really changed my life called Elance. It was called Elance then. It's now called Upwork. So as a non-technical person, I needed to find a developer who could actually build the technology. And I found this guy in Russia. So I was in my apartment on the Upper East Side, and there was a developer in Russia. And I never spoke to him. I only saw him for the first time probably like 4 years ago. And so we built Hopscotch just via chat, via WhatsApp messages and email. So obviously with a company, you need to have revenue and the only way you can have revenue most of the time is to have lots of customers, right? So it was a really tough thing to build a Hopscotch where you're not sure where the exit is or when you'll actually be sustainable, right? But you had to endure the uncertainty of just every day building and hoping that more people will use the site and there'll be advertisers to come to the site and pay you. So it's a very tough thing to be an entrepreneur because you go through these highs and lows, and there's no experts, right? I will say certainly, well, by year 3 you'll have this, or by year 4, right? So, and that's why it's that leap of faith, right? I think in some ways we all have taken that leap, right? And just being able to have enough courage in that idea you have and being able to jump, right? And that's critical act of faith. That jump is what led everyone on this table to where they are. And I guess for you guys, you have to think of what's that vision, what's that thing you've gravitated to, and somehow find the kind of the confidence to jump, right? But even after you jump, there's still the uncertainty of what the next day will bring, who the investors, where the investment will come from, where your customers will come from. But but you still need to jump, right? And because it's a very trying period. Because after I left the hedge fund, most of my colleagues were they were making lots of money. They were having all these fancy vacations, and I was struggling to figure out how to pay rent, right? So you get through it somewhere or another, and even if you don't get through it, you learn and you continue, right? So fear is your biggest enemy. It really is. Fear is the thing I think you need to overcome, and once you overcome that, then lots of things become possible.
You talked about your mother not wanting you to take a risk in entrepreneurship. Can you talk, maybe all three of you, a little bit about how your families, be it your parents or your siblings or people in your immediate network, have either been supportive or how you've had to navigate explaining to them how these processes are going? Because one thing I know from my life is when I made the plunge into entrepreneurship, my parents were sort of like, what is that? And when I explained it, they were like, no, that doesn't sound like a great idea. And so how did you guys deal with that if you encountered that? What was your experience like?
For me, my family's always been very supportive, but it is kind of a learning curve. Like, this is a field that is moving and changing so quickly, and so my parents had a lot of antiquated conceptions of what a software engineer is in their mind, and they're like, that's not our daughter. She's like social, and she loves like being creative. Like, I'd always loved being a writer, and so they couldn't understand like how, like, if this was a shift that I was doing just to capitalize on this train that's moving forward, the high salaries and like the success. Like, they just wanted to be certain that it was something I was doing because I loved it and I was passionate. And so they still, ask me questions like, okay, like, are you ever gonna go back to being a writer? Like, are you sure? And they're always like pushing me to make sure that, I'm not just sitting there and content with what I have. And so they're always like, great, you're like doing great in your job, so like what's next? And so that forces me to kind of articulate to them and to myself like, okay, why am I doing this, and what does this get me, and what path does this lead me on? And there's so many different roles, having coding, experience and being a technical person can open a lot of different doors beyond just being a software engineer. And so I think it really forces me to think about all of those, all of those different paths. So I think just my family has really pushed me to always be self-inquisitive of why am I here, why am I doing this, and what's next.
I've also been incredibly lucky to have super supportive parents, and my family has just always kind of pushed me to take my own path and make mistakes. I'm lucky to know that I have them there for me when I do fall, when I do take that leap and it doesn't turn out well. I know that my parents will be there for me with moral support, but they've always encouraged me to follow whatever path I choose to go down. So I've been incredibly lucky in that way. And then there was definitely a point last year when my dad just kind of didn't understand what I was doing. I was at this programming retreat, and he was like, what is that? What are you doing? And it wasn't until I went home and I showed him, I said, these are projects that I've built. And that gave him a hint a little bit more, but even then, he still didn't totally understand. And he's a tech guy, but he still didn't really grasp the full concept of me building a server and a web page and all of these things that come together to make this one product. So there's definitely a learning curve for them, but I've been incredibly lucky to have such a support system. And then also I have an older brother who is less into the tech world than I am. He's a bartender in St. Thomas, kind of living the life in the Caribbean right now. But I went to visit him, and I was just talking about all of these things like Bitcoin and whatever other tech buzzwords come up. And I realized that, and he played the role that in showing me how much I've learned and how far I have come. Because as I said, I felt imposter syndrome all the time last year. I still feel it a lot. But it's incredible because you don't necessarily realize how much you've learned until you look at where you started and you look at where you came from. And so he kind of showed that to me in just talking with him, that I used to be on the same level as him, and then now my knowledge base has just improved and increased tenfold.
As for me, so I remember talking to my wife and telling her I wanted to leave the hedge fund to start this company, and initially I thought her reaction was like, that's crazy, but surprisingly she said, oh yeah, sounds good, I think you should try. And I'm not sure if I probably would have done it even if she didn't sort of 100% approve, but I think having that base of support, I think it's something that it's very, very helpful, because you'll need the support, because you'll need encouragement, you'll need money, you'll need all kinds of things. And if you can build a support network of people who can bring you up spiritually, monetarily, whatever, when the down points come, I mean that's your defense against going crazy, essentially.
All right, we got time for 2, maybe 3 questions. Is there a brave volunteer? Go ahead.
Yes, so
Speak up if you don't mind.
so when you started coding, was it really hard or easy, and how did you feel?
I found a lot of resources. There's, like I said, there's so many resources out there, all of these coding tutorials online. You can find lists of ranking them and saying this one's better than that one. And then there are some that are just specifically great for absolute beginners, like you mentioned Codecademy, which is how I started. It just completely is, all right, starting from zero, assuming you know nothing, you can follow along and it really walks you through. And I was a big fan of Codecademy, which is definitely a great resource I recommend looking up. And it's free, and they have and then you can get to more advanced courses in there. And so even if you don't necessarily know where to start, they'll show you the basics. And I felt like it was extremely easy and actually a lot of fun.
question was, how does it feel to be a woman in the technology world? Like, do you feel like you get different treatment?
That was definitely something I was worried about going into it, and I think also something my parents worried about as well. But I think I made sure that I wanted to work at a company that was devoted to kind of diversity and making sure that, you know, I wouldn't have to think about that and second guess myself on a daily basis. So I think, and I also became interested in attending Flatiron because I saw that they were really dedicated to making sure that their classes were diverse, not just gender, but race, you know, sexual orientation, economically, because, you know, they offer scholarships, and they just wanted to make sure that, like, to expand what it means and what it looks like to be a software developer. So I do work on a team where there's 6 developers on my team. I'm the only woman, but I work in a workspace that's filled with women all day long. So I kind of have this kind of weird dichotomy between, like, the editorial world and being a software developer, but never once in the day do I feel like my coworkers and the company has made a lot of effort to ensure that, you know, I feel like that it's not something I think about on a day-to-day basis. And there will always be things, because I do go to events and things where, again, I'm the only woman, and you start to notice, and you start to tick it off in your brain. But my goal is, like, so Cole and I both volunteer for an organization called ScriptEd, and we teach high school students like you guys to code, and our class is mostly women, girls. And I'm, like, so excited of, like, in the next few years, like, my job, it will be, you know, there will be mostly women, or at least 50-50 women in my workplace. So I'm really looking forward to the future, and the near future, when, you know, the ratios will change.
I also ended up in a, like, great situation. I mean, my tech team, there are 6 of us total, including the CTO, who is a white male, but he's a feminist. He grew up with his mom facing a lot of adversity, so she instilled a lot of empathy in him, and he, you know, works hard to make sure that, you know, women are treated equally and that the office is diverse. We have a whole range of backgrounds as far as everybody who works at my company, and another reason I count myself as extremely lucky to have ended up in the situation that I'm in. We luckily don't have to deal with a lot of these horror stories that I've heard. Like, I've heard firsthand just really horrible ways that some women have been treated. I also work, my company has a female CEO, which also has a lot to do with it, which is great. But then, you know, you hear about these statistics from companies like Facebook and Twitter, how they're like, oh, we're going for diversity, but then there's still only like 2% black or something. There are some places that will walk the walk, but they don't, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. So it definitely, there are tough situations, and you just have to figure out, you know, where you fit in and where you're going to be comfortable. Because some people don't mind going in and being the only woman or the only person of color, but for other people, they're just like, that's not even a situation I'm interested in considering. So.
What was it like transitioning into not knowing what you wanted to do to knowing exactly what you wanted to do?
Did everybody hear the question? What was it like transitioning from not knowing what you wanted to do to knowing exactly what you wanted to do?
I mean, I don't know that I know now exactly what I want to do. I have a little more of a solidified idea, because now I have this skill that is, you know, really marketable. You know, it's something I can take a lot of places and do a lot of things with. So I think it actually makes it more difficult because it opens more options to me. And before, it was kind of like, okay, I don't think I could do this because I don't have that. And like with this skill, like it's, you know, it then becomes a bigger pool of things to do. And I think I still don't know exactly what I want to do, but I make sure that I'm like thinking about that every day. Like, okay, well, where do I want this to take me? Or do I like this? And is this something that I want to pursue? It's a constant, you know, it's a constant discussion with yourself. Like, what's next? What do I want? But at least for me, it wasn't like, okay, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I went to a coding boot camp, and then it all became clear. That's not how it worked for me. It was just like, this is a skill, and I'm building towards something, but it could change.
Yeah, I'm kind of similar. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. This I've never known, but I've always, like I said, I like to be prepared. So my biggest thing is when you don't know what to do, the best thing you can do is improve upon yourself, add some tools to your tool belt. Because I'd been interested in coding for a while, but like I said, I didn't really know that much about it, but I did know that it would be a great skill to have and that I'd be able to do anything I wanted with it. And so I ended up in this awesome situation at a great job that I'm really extremely happy in. I mean, I've only been here a couple months. I don't think I'll be with this company my entire life. You never know, but that's probably not in the cards for me. But I do know that when I do figure out, because I'd like to start my own business someday. I just haven't figured out what that business is yet. But I know that when I get there, I'm going to have the skills that I need in order to do that. So I think I haven't transitioned in this fully, as you said, but I'm working on it, and I'm going to make sure that I'm prepared when I do get there, and when I do figure out exactly what I want to do, I'm going to know that I can figure out how to do it.
Yeah, I think the best way to think of it is not what you want to do, but I think the interesting is to figure out who you are, right? I think that's probably a better way to think about that. So the more you think about who you really are, then what to do becomes so much easier, because that's you, right? That's your thing. So think of the classes you take, the experiences you have now, and that's not just figuring out what you want to do, but use the experiments to figure out who you are. And once you figure out who you are, then that's it. Then you're done, right? Because every day you'll do you, and if you do you, you'll do you more than anyone else in the world, because there's only you, right? So I think that's the way I try to think of that journey.
And on top of figuring out what you want to do, you can figure out what you want to get out of your experiences. Because that has also been, I've tried so many things because it will show me which aspects of jobs or experiences that I like and what things I don't like. So at the very least, I'm, narrowing the field down, and I knew that I wanted to be on a team. First of all, I love working for a woman CEO, and I love that my CTO is a feminist. Those two things are very important to me. And my office, just like the vibe of the people that I work with, is very important to me. So, I knew that, and also that I'd be learning a lot. That was a high priority for me, and the team that I came into, it's a priority for them as well to help me learn, and they also want to learn. So even to that extent, it's not always necessarily about the actual task that you're doing, if you enjoy the environment that you're doing it in and what you're learning along the way.
Very last question, because we have 20 seconds left.
Alright, so when you were both coding, did you think of your own goals that you were trying to reach?
Do you have specific goals you were trying to reach while you were coding? Is that the question?
For me, when I was at the programming retreat last year and I didn't know what to do, I had to pick a goal, like this is the project that I want to build. And I was okay if it got off track. Like at one point, I just wanted to build something using the Instagram API where I would just get a list of photos, and it turned into a whole different project. It just kind of morphed along the way, and it turned into something that shows you the difference between who you're following and who follows you. And that was just like a fun thing that I came up with while I was building it. So I definitely had a general idea of an endpoint, but it wasn't a solid, concrete thing for me.
Can we give a round of applause to the panelists, guys?